At this time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Scott Todnem. And Scott has been teaching health education for 18 years at Salem Middle School in Naperville, Illinois. He was awarded the 2017 Illinois Health Teacher of the Year. Besides teaching and presenting, Scott has been on curriculum writing committees, social diversity and multicultural teams, head of educational trips to the state and nation's capital, and team building coordinator for students and staff. Scott coached cross country and track and field for 15 years and was active in the community development of winter and summer running programs. Outside of the school setting, Scott is a community fitness leader as co-owner of a local strength and conditioning facility. He is an avid writer, movie watcher, and a father of four. We welcome Scott.
Good morning. Good morning. So we have to say special thanks to Barbie, of course, Maria, Brian McNally, Danielle LaRock, Claudia Brown, of course, and who can forget Charlie? So thank you so much. I've been told I'm a big picture person. And now anytime someone reveals an observation about our personality, have you ever noticed it puts you on the defense, even if there's no real reason to be defensive? We get a little self-conscious. Somebody noticed something about us that maybe we didn't notice ourselves. Almost like when somebody tells you got food in your teeth. It's bad when it's a stranger because we're embarrassed that somebody noticed. You got some food. We cover up, right? Oh no, where's a rear? But what if it's a significant other? Honey, you've got something in your teeth.
No, they don't.
And I'm like, why didn't you tell me earlier? I've been walking around talking to people all day like this. Same thing with personality characteristics. It's human. We get food in our teeth. We have differences as personality characteristics. It's what makes us unique, right? The joke is, remember you're unique, just like everyone else. And so if this is me, and I am a big picture person, it got me thinking, am I really? And isn't everyone? So as I looked at what I do with health education, I realized I am big picture, especially with new students coming into my classroom. And I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And the new 6th graders coming in out of elementary school, coming to my middle school, really don't know what health ed is all about. So I use the health triangle. And I like the health triangle. I know there's a lot of different ways to do things. But I use the health triangle because to me it just makes it a simplistic look at life. Physical, mental, and social well-being. Health is a combination of physical, mental, and social well-being. And from there we can get as complex as we need. Where does spiritual health fit in? Occupational health, emotional health. But I like that one. And especially if it's an equilateral triangle. And a lot of you use that, I get it, I know. And to me then, there is a difference between health and wellness. And health education and wellness sometimes are synonymous. But I like to think of wellness as a bubble. And it contains health. Health changes every single day, every minute of every day. Wellness doesn't change that much day to day. We're still basically in the same wellness spectrum from yesterday until today. But if I didn't get my exercise, or I skipped a little bit of sleep, or I haven't eaten the right food for my meal, then you know health changes day to day. Wellness, it takes something quite major. And so if we think of it like a balloon, and wellness is like a balloon, if we increase then wellness or health, then we blow up the balloon. Like literally right now. And then over time, do we keep that inflated or do we have annoying habits that leak out wellness little by little, or sometimes it's a one-day decision. It's just a one scenario, one situation decision, and there it goes. And when I look at health education, I think of it in 3 parts as well. And so I found some clarity with looking at what it is that I'm doing with health education. And I'd love for you to see that big picture with me today, and maybe even think of life as this silly little balloon. And health education is something large as well. So what we'll do, if you're going to go with me on this trip, is we'll go big picture, we'll go global, we'll go local, we'll go global again. Worldview to our local communities with health education, and then what's our impact on the world as well. So health education if I get down to a 3-part basic definition, is a life-saving, life-changing, and life-sustaining experience. Meaning, we can literally save lives with health ed. We can definitely change lives if need be. But not everything needs to be changed. So in a lot of ways, what we're looking at is health literacy, sustainability, life-sustaining experience. So, okay, a big picture view. Do you know how many humans are on Earth right now? 7 billion, nicely done. We're approaching 7.7 billion human beings on Earth. Estimates put us at 7.6 billion just this past May. So we're approaching 7.7 billion. And of those Americans, sorry, I said Americans, 7.7 humans, right? Of those 7.7, we've got a whole bunch that are Americans. No, we have to Google that one. And so if we look like big picture, what is happening with human beings, that's what we're going to do today. So in a lot of ways, I'm going to go bigger than health ed. I'm going to go bigger than education. I'm going to go on the life focus and then back to health ed. Well, let's start by going real small. So 7.7 billion, what if we go small? What if we go, instead of human beings, to one of the smallest animal species we know of, those little pesky ants. Do you know how many ants are on Earth? Estimates put it at 10 billion. I didn't even know what that number meant, so I had to learn what it meant. I think it means you take a billion, you multiply it by a billion, and you do that 10 more times. Now, I can't understand that number, so maybe you're like me, and we need comparisons. So comparatively speaking, the weight of all the ants on Earth is approximately the same as all the humans on Earth. The weight is approximately the same for ants. What if we go smaller? Fungus. Seemingly small, right? But there's a fungus in the Blue Mountains of Oregon that spans 2.5 miles across. It's the largest living organism we've found. Way bigger than dinosaurs. 2.5 miles across. What about smaller? Bacteria? Do we know the number of bacteria? Of course not. Why would we think about thinking like big numbers? 5 million, trillion. That's a 5 with 30 zeros after it. Now, why bring up all of that? Because we're just another animal species on Earth, albeit the most intelligent and, dare I say, important one, but definitely the most impactful. So if we look at humans and we see the human impact on Earth, well, there's more plastic flamingos than real flamingos in the U.S. In fact, the entire continent, as well as South America. Are you afraid of spiders? You should be far more afraid of a champagne cork injuring you than a poisonous spider. We are far more likely to be injured by a champagne cork than a poisonous spider. What about sharks? Seems like it's really scary, right? No. Way more likely to be attacked by a cow. So why? Well, it's human impact. Like, we have factories that mass produce plastics every single day, obviously. We could tour the country or the world and find breweries and wineries that fill us with spirit. And of course, we are producing and breeding cattle at a rate of 2,000 cows per second. Human impact. And our impact as health educators then can be either minor or major, but both is okay. Worldview, small local community view, back to worldview. So we're going to go on a journey then, life-saving, life-changing, life-sustaining experience. And I have 3 stories that I'd like to share. And within those 3 stories, I have 3 other stories. Okay, let's see if I can pull this off. Okay. In 1957, there was a doctor named Kurt Richter. And Dr. Richter and his team studied rats throughout the 50s and 60s. He studied rodents, wild and domesticated rats. And what they did was they found out how long the rats could last in a jar of water. They'd put the rat in the jar of water and watch and observe how long, what was the behavior, and how much time until they drowned. Now, it's 1957. Maybe we don't do experiments like that anymore. Maybe we do. but they just witnessed and watched how long until they drowned. And the average rat lasted 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Some gave up right away. They found out that the domesticated rats tended to last a little bit longer than the wild rodents. Some gave up right away. A lot of those were wild. 15 minutes. Now, what they decided to do is then they take that number, 15 minutes, and they did a follow-up experiment. What would happen if they took the rats out of the water just before that 15-minute mark, allowed them to struggle for 14-some minutes, took them out of the water, dried them off, gave them a little breather, and then put them back in the water? How much longer would they last with that quick breather? Anybody think another 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Anybody think they doubled their time? 15 more minutes because of the quick breather, rest? 15 more minutes? So the ones that were not given a break, remember, 15 minutes. The rats that were given a quick breather lasted 3 days. Seventy to 80 hours. Now, we could interpret this story and have a couple of comparisons, and the first would be, that's horrible, that was really gruesome. Because we saved the rats, we put them back in, they ultimately just perished anyway. But what allowed those rats that were given a break to last almost 250 times longer than their peers who weren't given any break, any breather, weren't touched? What is it that allowed that to happen? A rodent we equate with filth and disease just caused emotion in your brain. If I did it right. If you heard the story before, you heard it, you're like, I heard it before. If I did it right, you felt a little bit of sadness for those rats in 1957. Hope. So if we're looking at hope as an emotion and hope with human beings, we don't teach rats, we teach humans. How do we develop hope in our health ed classroom? Is it possible to teach an emotion? How do you teach a feeling, something as abstract maybe as hope? So as you think about your own classroom, then that's up to you. That's not for me to tell you today. That's your setup. Is it a welcoming environment? Is it the setup you do on day one, first week? However you create hope, totally up to you. Now, if we're looking at how we can do it, we can define it. We're up to this challenge. We use advocacy. Advocacy is hope in action. Advocacy is the road to success. And so if we're looking at our National Standard 8, what a great standard for advocacy, because it's so succinct and it's really, really nicely stated in a way that we can easily then use for students. They can understand this. We need to define advocacy, of course. But then, if we're looking at the definition, students will demonstrate the ability to advocate for personal, family, and community health. The first item listed in there is personal health. An advocate for yourself, a self-advocate. So to develop hope in a health classroom, and we're looking at advocacy, let's not jump right ahead and say, what cause do you believe in? Let's start with the students themselves. Believe in you. Believe in yourself. Hope lets us have a notion that there is a future. The rats that were given a break had a notion it could happen again. So in our students, more developed than rats, what is the notion that there is a future? And I like to tie advocacy with mental health. There's a whole lot of ways to do this. But I do like mental health because if we're starting with self-advocacy, then that is mental health. How to cope, how to deal with stress. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders for me. Some of you are at the same level. Some of you are a little bit lower level. Some of you are higher all the way through college. It all matters to develop hope through advocacy. And after going through a mental health focus and advocacy, one year I received a letter on my classroom desk from a student. I'm sure as teachers you get letters quite often. Now it's email. Sometimes Instagram messages, but nonetheless, some type of message letter from students. This was a typed out anonymous letter, and it started off, "Dear Mr. Todnem, I'd like to thank you for something you didn't even realize you did." It went on, it said, in a way you saved my life. And it went on to talk, and I can't read it because I tear up and I choke up every time I read it, but it went on to say, when we were talking about mental health and depression and suicide and self-advocacy in health class, you changed what I was thinking for the future. Now the student came in later on in the quarter, in person, a few weeks later, and said the same type of thing. You know, I didn't want to make it anonymous anymore, but I left a letter. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. I left a letter on your desk. And I said, I know what you're talking about. They're like, how did you know it was me? I said, well, I didn't, but I don't receive too many of those letters each year. And they said, I'd just like to thank you again. And I said, can I stop you? Because I didn't save your life. You saved your own. And they said, well, I just want to know what the next step is. I really have been feeling like I've been drowning lately. And I knew that didn't mean actual water. But as I heard the story of Richter's rats, I realized we're helping our students every single day. And can we create hope through advocacy? Yes, we can. We're up to the challenge. How? It's up to you. Play to your strengths. What are those strengths that you have for compassion? So I can tell you that student is very much alive and well. They're doing great. I use the letter as an example, and I say, can I use this? Because students in your place might benefit, as you talked about advocacy and mental health. They said, absolutely, you should use it. And I do. So, our road to success doesn't necessarily have to start with advocacy, but I like to think that advocacy is that road to success. Hope through advocacy, a life-saving experience. Okay, so what about changing the world? Well, this takes me back to 2009 when Dr. Matthias Osvath out of Lund University in Sweden published some findings from their zoo. As a scientist, he was studying, namely, a chimpanzee named Santino. So we moved from rats to a little closer relative of ours, our cousins, the chimpanzee. Santino had a couple of interesting habits through a decade of research, and Dr. Matthias Osvath then reported this in Scientific American and Current Biology, and he reported that Santino had developed a habit of walking around Chimp Island before the zoo was opening and digging up rocks in the moat that surrounded Chimp Island between the fence and, of course, then the monkeys and the apes. And he would find rocks and dig them out of the dirt and dig them out of the moat and then pile the rocks at different places around the island and then sit and wait. And when the zoo visitors came, he eventually then started to get angry that they were all staring. Because eye contact is a great thing for human beings, but sometimes in the animal kingdom that means intimidation. So he would calmly go over to his places that he had rocks stacked up, pick up a rock one by one, and start throwing them at the visitors. Yes, he hit them. No one was ever seriously hurt. But Dr. Osvath and his team could not help Santino stop the habit of throwing stones at zoo visitors. Now, to me, I'm laughing because it's a little bit funny, isn't it, for a chimpanzee to wake up in the morning and do whatever the chimps do and calmly walk around the island, not irritated, and pile up rocks so that when he did become irritated, he could throw them. And I think of what we're connecting in health education that might link with Santino the chimpanzee. Dr. Osvath said that planning for a future mental state is very much a human condition. It's viewed that only humans can know a future feeling or emotion. But we find out in the animal kingdom that that can happen anywhere. A lot of great apes do this. Guess where they learned the behavior of throwing, however? Human beings. We have an impact on the world. And so ultimately it took a whole team to decide what are we going to do so that we don't have visitors getting pegged with rocks. And Santino did stop the habit, but it wasn't because of the impact as much as humans thought, because they went through everything from neutering him to working with him to counseling and therapy. It became something that he chose to do. So Santino, here's Santino, the actual chimpanzee. Doesn't look too harmful. But he developed this habit that was a life-changing habit. He saw the future, he changed his behavior so that when he was in that future moment, he could then execute whatever it was he wanted to do when angry. And then he changed his behavior back. And that happened because of choice. So how are we looking at choice then in health education? Are we up to the challenge of providing choice? Absolutely. There's a couple of different national standards we could look at with choice. I mean, right away we think of decision making. Like right away, decision making. And that's true, but I like to think of decision making more as a reactive standard and then goal setting as proactive. So if we're checking out national standard number 6, students will demonstrate the ability to use goal setting skills to enhance health. We can provide choice through goal setting. Now, if hope is a notion that there is a future, choice is making a decision, is acting to make a decision. So goal setting is choice in action. Maybe advocacy is our road to the future. Well, choice is the vehicle pointing in the right direction. And as you look at your goal setting assignments in your health ed classroom, we could set that up in a whole variety of ways. But be careful to tell students they need to change. Sometimes adults are quick to say, you need to change, here's what you need to do. There's no choice in that. What if they need to, instead of change, keep a habit that is healthy? That's okay for a goal setting assignment. And what if we then, instead of say, here's what you need to change, or look at your life and decide what needs to change, what if we begin with some strengths? What is happening that is good in their lives? What is happening that's healthy? What's beneficial? So in my goal setting assignment that I use in 8th grade, I realized something on October 10th of 2010, is that I've been going about it a little wrong. And you might be like, how do you know the exact date? Well, because I ran the marathon on October 10th in 2010. That's a long time ago. It was my first and only marathon. Maybe I'll get a different one or a new one in, but I decided to run the Chicago Marathon on October 10th of 2010. I decided on October 1st of the same year. And my lovely wife, Sarah, was going to run the Chicago Marathon and had been training for weeks and months and had planned to run the Chicago Marathon, but then as the time got closer, her knees couldn't handle it. Just too much pain going on in her knees. She was like, I got to drop out. I can't handle my long runs anymore. And I go, don't sell the ticket. Don't give it away. I will run it. I've been running with the cross-country team. I've been working out. I can jump in there. So if you've ever gotten into a run and you've ever gotten into a marathon, the first mile is easy. I know some of you are like, I can't run 1 mile, let alone like 26. But the first mile is very easy. And the first mile in the marathon is like a big group of animals just going along. And you're real close to each other and you're just kind of off. You finally walk up after minutes of trying to get to the start line because all the elite runners are gone, you know. And then they just take you with. Shoulder to shoulder, here we go. Oh, here we go. All right. My feet didn't even touch the ground. Easy first mile. We get into like mile 3, mile 4, mile 5, and I'm cruising. I'm like, I'm doing this. Everybody's nearby. Yeah, you're running the marathon. I'm like, I am. I'm running the marathon. I get to the halfway point, and I see my family. And they say the worst possible thing that you could say to a runner at a halfway point of a race. They tell you the truth. It sounds very motivational. My mom's there. My wife Sarah had already jumped in. She'd been running a little bit with me. I see my oldest daughter, and they go, you're halfway. You're halfway. It's the truth. I was halfway, but it's the worst thing you could hear. Because I look, and I'm like, I've been running for about 2 hours. I have to run 2 more hours, at least. And I was deflated. So we get going. I get into that wall portion, 14, 16 miles in, and I hit it hard. And my quads lock up, and they're like, hey, dummy, you haven't been drinking water. And I was like, oh, yeah. And so they do the thing where they tighten up. And I decide at like mile 18 that I need to slow down quite a bit, maybe even walk a little bit. And I couldn't really handle it, so I sat down. I sat down on the curb, and I'm just thinking about life. What does it all mean? I'm looking up at the sky, I'm looking down at the ground, and there's all these pebbles along the Chicago road that I'm looking at. And my beautiful wife, she says to me the most motivational thing at that point, which sounds mean, but it worked really well. She says, she says, sitting down in a race is not going to get you to the finish line. She goes, get up. You can't sit down in a race. And I was immediately struck with this notion of being positive instead of negative. And I think of Santino the chimpanzee throwing rocks at other people as a negative part of his life. And I look at all these pebbles on the ground, and I think of Stephen Covey's old activity from like 20 years ago, Big Rocks and Little Rocks, where it's talking about priorities in life. And I go, is this marathon a big rock or a little rock? Is this major to me? It is. I want to finish. Get up. You can't sit down in a race. So I get up. We go finish, even though the last mile of the Chicago Marathon is uphill. I don't know why they do that to you, but it is. It's just uphill. The start, yay. The end, we finish. I do, in fact, get through. And we end up talking a little bit with some family, and we realize we need to go catch the train. Well, the train station is a mile away from the finish line of the Chicago Marathon, and we had to run. So I ran 27 miles that day. Just the whole thing that you can imagine. We got to the train station and missed the train. So I waited another hour for the next train to come by. Meanwhile, not really getting any replenishment. Got home. I weighed myself. I lost 8 pounds that day. Now, you tell somebody like a runner, they're like, oh, yeah, 8 pounds. It's not healthy. You tell a non-runner, and they go, oh, I should just run a marathon every day. They always seem to pat themselves in the body fat. Oh, 8 pounds a day. Well, I should run a marathon every day. I'm like, yeah, that's enough. It's all water. And as I looked at my goal-setting assignment in my 8th grade health, I brought back that experience because that is basically a failure on what a healthy goal might look like. And I think that if you can embrace your failures and embrace your mistakes, then you can be a role model out there for fixing and changing them. I used to go into a goal-setting assignment saying, here's what we're going to do, here's your options, go to it. I had a changed view on life. Thank you, Santino the chimp, and thank you, the Chicago Marathon. So think about your own goal-setting assignments and how you offer choice. Now, obviously, you want to have a goal-setting assignment that is going to be positive. So there's always going to be rules and there's restrictions, and you can have guidelines. Some of my basic guidelines are it needs to be challenging, it needs to be legal, and it can't interfere in somebody else's life negatively. Because we could hurl insults at someone, we could throw stones, or we could be positive and change our own life. There's a difference to that. And really, if you know this, adolescents, they do want to be good people. It may seem like we're teaching a classroom full of chimpanzees. And you are dodging everything thrown at you from not just the students, but administration and standards. But we're teaching humans. We're teaching people. So what is it with goal setting that you can do that is going to offer choice? And if we think about then our goal setting assignments, then we're offering choice. That's a life-changing experience. 2 down, 1 to go. And our last focus point is going to get away from rats and away from chimpanzees. And it's going to get us into this term sustainability. To sustain something means to prolong, to continue for an extended period of time, to sustain. And sustainability actually encompasses life-changing situations as well as life-saving situations. Sustainability is health literacy in action. And if we look at then our animal welfare, we're very much linked to animal welfare. I've been focusing on that quite a bit, maybe too much for today. There's other animals instead of humans. But we are linked as we think about what we're doing with the production of food or meat or then greenhouse gases. What about water resources, other resources? We are linked to animal. In fact, as human consumers, our health is very much linked to animal health, as well as environmental health. So how can we sustain environmental well-being? How can we sustain economic well-being? But also, how can we keep human beings going? We can do that. Health education does that. We're up to the task. So our last focus, if I might connect, then takes us into sustainability for human beings. Just 100 years ago, we were losing humans to fires at an extraordinary rate. Now in 2018, we have about 350,000 fires in the US, house fires. And a lot of times we're able to save not just the people, but then the house itself. Sustainability. And the number one, well, in and out, some of the causes, one of the top causes of a house fire are candles. Now the hotel wouldn't let me light a real candle. And sustainability then for human beings is that we are obviously evolving constantly. Medical technology, other technology. We used to have horse-drawn carriages to get the water hoses to the houses. And with horses, they became spooked because of the fire. They brought along man's best friend, a dog. And the dogs that worked real well as calming effects on horses were best suited for the job were Dalmatians. Maybe you know that's now basically a firehouse dog. And they were a calming effect on the horses, and that's why they became eventually fire dogs. And if we think about man's best friend, dogs, then there's a lot of things that could be caused because of dogs, namely fires. In fact, a lot of the candles are knocked over because of pets. But also, we have stories upon stories of dogs helping humans and saving their life. Stories. Now, it could be just a service dog. It could be the mental health of having a dog around, sustainability for that person. We know that emotions then are calmed because of pets, because of dogs. But also physically, literally being saved. So I could tell you about a few different stories with dogs and especially with fires. Like this is Nyla, barked her owner out of the house during a house fire. So much smoke, the owner couldn't see anything, didn't know where she was going, and Nyla barked, could have left at any point, but stayed to make sure the owner walked out of the house before the fire department even came. This coexistence of dogs and humans leads to our life sustainability. In fact, we found that that's been around for about 15,000 years. I could tell you about Che. Che lied on his owner during the fire until the fire department came. They found both of them lying down in a corner, Che the dog on top, guarding his owner from the flames. Both lived. I could tell you about Eve. Eve dragged her owner out of the truck that they were in during an accident. The owner is paraplegic and dragged her by the ankles out of the truck, got far enough before it exploded. Literally saving lives. And the one I do want to focus on is Capone. Capone saved the family during a house fire. The Fulmer family just last year out of Des Moines. And the Fulmer family all lived. Now the Fulmers have 9 kids. And they all were okay. 9. But imagine losing just 1. Now why bring that up? Because it seems like that could be a story that I should have used for our life-saving focus or life-changing focus. But remember, life sustainability encompasses all of that. It's living into the future. It's saving, it's changing. This is my dog, Buddy. He's 6 months old, almost 70 pounds. And the first time I've ever had a pet. Before Buddy, I was not a pet person. And I still am unsure if I am a pet person. But he's changing my behavior for the better. And I realized upon getting Buddy is that my actions toward the world could improve. My actions or my thoughts and everything that I do, it could improve. I'm learning that because of a dog. Yes, through my wife and my 4 great children, but also Buddy the dog, a 6-month-old pup. And as I'm thinking about then my life and what it is that I need to do and how I can create action and what I'm doing as a health educator, it lets me know that our standards are so awesome as a lead, as a great place to start. They just tell me. Standard 7 tells me that health education provides an opportunity for action because of practice. Students will demonstrate the ability to practice health-enhancing behaviors or avoid and reduce health risks. This is life sustainability. Health education is action. Health education is practice. So if hope is the notion that there's a future, and choice lets us create and see a future, well, action lets us fulfill that future. So in our health classes, are we providing enough practice time? Now, does that mean you do role modeling? Does that mean you do some type of debate? Does that mean that you have hands-on activities? That's where you come into play. That's where you then become the health teacher that you were meant to be, providing practice. And our national health standards, they provide all that as opportunity. Practice. Sometimes I overlook this one because there are so many great skills to see in our national standards. I look at accessing information or analyzing influences or some of the other ones we've already mentioned. But don't forget, we want to provide them practice. Let's model the behavior. Let's discuss or describe it first, model, and then do we have practice time? And afterwards, can we give them feedback? Can we tell students, here's what I saw? And as we role model, as we're modeling behavior, thank you, Buddy the dog, you helped me out. I need to be better than I was. I need to see then a future. I want to create that future. Can I fulfill that future? So a lot of times then teaching is changing with your students. And practice time, if I think about then our practice time, my practice assignment is one that seems like it's not any of our health skills in action, but it's my favorite because I think it's all of the health skills in action. I let the 8th graders write a letter to their future. And I know that this isn't a new thing. I stole this from a couple other teachers, and a lot of times people do a personal time capsule in other classes or even in their church life. I've been told that some students already have written letters to the future. But in 8th grade, I let them write a letter to the future. I keep it for 4 years. And then I deliver it through snail mail in the year that they graduate high school. Now, if we're looking at then sustainability, they're writing to their future, and they're then talking about their past, and they can write about anything they like, but oftentimes they come back and they visit or they give messages. I got my letter, and here I am. And if we're looking at life sustainability, just having that notion, I'm going to get a letter from my past, sometimes that's motivation enough to keep going. Now, unfortunately, I have lost students before. And students have passed away before I could deliver their letter to the future. And if you're like me, and maybe even teaching a couple of years, we lose them, and to behaviors that are health topics. I've lost a few to heroin. We have a heroin issue in some of the parts of Chicagoland. I've lost some to accidents, illness, as well as suicide. Very much health topics. My students always joke when we start with this lesson. They go, what if I'm not here in 4 years? What do you do? And I go, funny enough you ask. I never know what to do. Do I give the letter to the family? Do I keep it? Do I offer it up? What do I do? And they go, well, what if we're not around? And I was like, well, we have a lot more things to worry about. If the world isn't here, then a letter to your future. And then they always go, well, what if you're gone? And I joke, well, I hope you'll light a candle for me. And they go, what? I was like, well, I hope you light a candle for me. It's just a joke, really, in sarcasm. They go, what does that mean? I'm like, it's a memory. And they go, what if you lose students? Do you light a candle? I go, I do. I should light a candle in case I lose a student. Sure, absolutely. And then they ask other questions. What if there's a fire? I'm like, it's fine. They're in a fireproof container. And again, sarcasm, it's cardboard boxes. But in the end, what we're trying to do with health education is we're trying to light a fire under our students to not just see the future, but then to create the future and fulfill that future. We can't be blamed for all of these other things that happen. If somebody has a math equation 4 years in the future after their math teacher taught them and they get it wrong, they're not blamed as a middle school or high school math teacher. It's not our fault for everything that happens, but boy, do we internalize it, don't we? What could I have done as a great health teacher that I could have seen some of those warning signs or I could have helped? So let's focus on the positive. You are literally then, okay, not literally, you are figuratively lighting a fire on your students to then see a future, create, and fulfill. And we're doing that with hope, with choice, and definitely with action. So our action through practice, a life-sustaining experience, what great lessons do you love? What's your favorite assignment that allows that to take place? So all of these ideas that I shared with you today, really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create that big picture view. Because later on today, we've got plenty of great sessions I can't wait for, and tomorrow, where we dive into the focus. We get into the details, we get into those life skills, and I'd like to think that that big picture view might help. Now you can take it or leave it, but it's provided a lot of clarity for me in the last year, a couple of years, as I look at what it is I'm doing for Health Ed. Okay, so I've shared with you a couple of stories, and then a couple more stories, and maybe too many stories. And then in the meantime, I've shared with you this space. So here's our last natural element of life, air. Some people are like, it's empty. It's full of air. And so we can, as health educators, be full of hot air. But I know a lot of educators, I know a lot of teachers, and we're the opposite. It's not just lip service. What we do really matters to us. And when it matters to us, it can matter to the students. What we're trying to do is create a chance for them to have hope, a chance for them to have choice, and a chance for them to act. And that's life. So I'll wrap up, and in closure, if we're thinking about health, then health is life. The rest is just detail. We are saving, changing, and sustaining all the time. And I'd like to share with you a time where I saved the world, where I changed the world, and where I sustained the world, and that time is now. So go for it, and as a couple of last reminders, embrace any failures you might have. Embrace the mistakes. Play to your strengths. And then create hope, choice, and action. Now and always. Thanks.